Hi everybody, back in the culinary barn here in beautiful Prince Edward County, and I have a relatively simple, excellent for end of summer dessert recipe for you using what is currently available at the farm stands in terms of stone fruit. Cherries have pretty well come and gone, but we are pretty much in the best part of the summer for the other stone fruits: peaches, nectarines, and all the plums. And we have a few different varieties that we grow around here. For this particular dessert that I'm going to show you how to make today, we're going to use some of the Niagara peaches, as well as some of these gorgeous red plums, red blush plums. And then I've got some of these beautiful dark kind of aubergine colored plums. These are very nostalgic because we had a couple of these trees growing on our property when we were growing up, and I used to love going out and picking them. So I'm going to show you how to make a very fun but very simple dessert, including some all butter French style pastry, which is going to be the base. And this beautiful stone fruit mixed together with this simple pastry, and we're going to make a little stone fruit galette. And all in all, doesn't take a ton of time. I'm going to try and point out a few tips and tricks for you in terms of dealing with the pastry. And then we're just going to nick it in the oven. We're going to have a little moment with a book. Of course, I have another little book recommendation for you while this is baking off. And then you'll have a beautiful dessert, or you can go slightly more French or Italian style and serve this for breakfast the next morning with coffee. So the first thing we're going to start off doing is the pastry itself. I prefer to do this by hand, but you can of course do this in a food processor or a stand mixer, but I always like to show people how to do things from scratch the first time around. So in this bowl, I have some all-purpose flour, no special flour required here. I'm going to add in some white sugar. So this is actually called pâte à sucre, or sugar pastry, because of course it has sugar in it. We do need a touch of salt, just for a little bit of balance here. And then I'm just going to give this just a quick toss with my hands. I'll just move the stone fruit out of the way here, just to make sure that all my flour is broken down and I've incorporated the sugar and salt in. And I have pre-cut some very cold unsalted butter into small cubes, and I'm going to add that into the bowl as well. And the first thing I'm going to do is, just with clean hands, I'm just going to go into the bowl and just gently toss the butter around so that it gets individually coated in the flour. And whilst I'm doing that, you can just make sure that any of the cubes of butter aren't stuck together. It'll just make your life a little easier when you go to crumble the butter into the flour. So once all of your cubes are coated in flour, you can go ahead and start pushing the butter into the flour. Now you can use a pastry cutter to do this, or you can use two knives. I always found the knives a little bit cumbersome, but a pastry cutter does work well. But there's nothing better than your own hands. So I'm just going to show you a close-up here. So literally what I'm doing is I'm just using my thumb and my index finger primarily, and just pushing the butter, almost flaking it into little shales, into the flour. And you want to do this relatively quickly so that you don't soften the butter too much. If you have hands that run particularly hot, you may want to do this even quicker. But that's why some people opt to use a food processor or a stand mixer, is they can get the butter broken down faster. So I'm just going to do this as quickly as I can. I'm not looking for 100% even pieces of butter flecked throughout, but ideally the little pieces of butter would be kind of the size of peas, or if they're more like flakes, sort of like, kind of like so. Very thin. All right, so I'm going to continue on doing this until I've got a crumbly, what appears to be more like an apple crumble topping. And then we're going to add a little bit of water to bring this loose dough together. And most of the butter is broken down into small pieces. And this whole technique for me of making sort of French style all butter pastry was taught to me in Burgundy by a woman named Marna. And I've just always used her technique. There are obviously various other techniques you can use, some of which are, I suppose, simplified. But mine, I don't think is particularly unusual, but as I often teach French pastry, usually a couple times a month, and my students are often a little bit dumbfounded by this method that I use, but lo and behold, it works every time. So I'll just sort of give you a close-up here. If you can see that, just sort of like a crumble, again, sort of like an apple crumble topping, but it's all broken down. So obviously this is not holding together like a dough. So I've got some very cold, just regular flat water off to the side. And I'm just going to start by adding a little bit. It's always best to start with a little, add a little more if you need it. And again, just use my fingers to just toss this together. And I'm going to tip this out onto my board now. So again, you can kind of see better now what I'm working with here in terms of a shaggy dough. And then I'm going to add a little bit more water. And just start bringing this together just so that it holds together when squeezed in your hand. I don't want to add too much moisture. I don't want this to be a overly moist or hydrated dough. I want the butter to be the primary agent that's holding the pastry together, not the water. So I'm just going to knead this a little bit and just make a decision about if I need a little bit more water, which in this case, I think I probably need just about a tablespoon or so more. And I'll just quickly work that in. And I'll show you what I mean here by just being able to squeeze it together. So I've just brought in most of this dough together, but if I just take a piece off and squeeze it in my hand, it just holds together in sort of like a frail kind of dough ball. You don't want to overly compress your dough because then you'll have essentially pressed the butter too far into the flour and it won't be as light and flaky as we want this crust to ultimately be. So from this stage, I'm going to, and don't stress about this, if you have some little pieces like this, don't worry. What we're gonna do now is press this into a piece of cling film and sort of pat it out into a disc with all of these little bits. And this is gonna go into the fridge for at least 20 minutes, but you can do this a day in advance. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna clean up my hands and then we're gonna come back and prep the fruit. All right, pastry is in the fridge, chilling out for a bit. So for our fruit, what I like to do with this particular galette is actually just leave the fruit in halves instead of slicing them. So this makes it an even easier process. So for our peaches, leaving the skins on. If you have a particular proclivity and you would like to remove them, you can do the blanching method, just doing a little score in the bottom, quickly submerging them about 90 seconds or so in boiling water, and then directly into ice cold water, and those skins will peel right off for you. But I like the skins. So all I'm gonna do here is just go around the stone like so, and then these are freestone peaches. So the little pip will come right out, and then you've got two gorgeous halves. And I'm gonna do the exact same process on the plums as well. And same thing, this will just pop right out of the center, and then you've got your two little halves. And then for the darker ones, again, exactly the same, a little twist, and then pop this little almond shaped stone out. And you get this kind of like chartreuse color on the inside of this one. So you can use any style of plum that you want, or any other stone fruit that you want. Of course, nectarines, cherries, if they're in season or at the store, they happen to look particularly good. There's also the little baby yellow plums, the larger little yellow plums. There's the Renier plums, which if you can find them are amazing. But again, you can just go to the farm stand, see what looks good, and make what you will with it. So I'm just gonna carry on slicing and de-stoning the rest of my stone fruit, and then we will roll out to the pastry for this very beautiful galette. All right, so we've got all of our stone fruit cut up, and I remembered I had a couple of these Italian black plums off to the side as well. So I'm gonna add those in as well, because why not? So all of our stone fruit, I'm just gonna push up to the top here, and we will get rolling out our pâte à sucre, pastry. So just cold from the fridge. Move this to the side so you can make sure that you can see her. So I've just got a nice loose disc. Again, it's not heavily compacted, but the chill is back on it, so that ensures that the butter, all those little pieces of butter that you work so hard to flex through the flour, haven't melted or gotten too soft. So I'm just going to start rolling this out. tips for rolling out: never go completely off the edge, because your edge will always just keep getting thinner and thinner and will contribute to it potentially sticking. And speaking of sticking, the best way to keep it from sticking is, I like to roll out on a wood surface, but also just keep moving the dough around. So every couple passes I do on the dough, I make sure that I can still move it around. I do keep a little bit of bench flour off to the side, but my rule of thumb is to only use it when absolutely necessary, because bear in mind, recipes don't include bench flour as part of the overall weight. And this is particularly important in pastry. When you kind of get a little stressed out that it is sticking a little bit and then you're just constantly throwing bench flour at it, every time you add a little bit, or kind of sometimes a lot of bench flour, you're contributing to stiffening up that dough a little bit, because now your ratio of fat or moisture to the bulk, i.e. the flour, is now shifted. So try just moving it around as much as you can. Now, typically galettes are circular, but I'm actually going to go a little bit different today and do a rectangular galette. And again, I just keep moving this around, and I'm looking for just a rough shape, not looking for a perfect rectangle, but I do want the thickness to be relatively even. And in this case, I'm looking for about 1/4 of an inch or so. And you won't be able to see it on camera so much, but I can see the little bits of butter on the top of this. So again, making sure that the butter hasn't been fully kind of smeared into the flour, as opposed to being little individual pieces. And what will happen is when it goes into the oven, the water content of the butter, as it heats up, it'll boil, and that water will evaporate out, and the layers of pastry will kind of lift as that water goes out, and the fat that's left behind in the butter will kind of fry all those little layers, and that's how you get a nice flaky, buttery crust. So I'm just feeling just a touch of stickiness, so just a tiny bit of bench flour, and I actually like to rub it in to the wood as opposed to just leaving it on top. And I'm just going to go back to my rolling. And any place where you might have a little crack, don't stress about it. Now, if you wanted to ensure kind of like an extra flaky lamination, what you could do is fold the pastry into thirds, like so, and then give it one more fold, like that. I'm just going to put a little bit of bench flour down, and then you can roll out again. But again, you want to work quickly if doing that, and also ensure that you can still see little flecks of butter. All right, so I'm going to finish rolling this out into the rectangle. I have finished rolling out my pata sucra into the rectangle, and I've preheated the oven to 375 degrees, and I have a half sheet pan here that I've lined with a piece of parchment paper. And I have just lifted and placed my pata sucra, and pretty much it's almost the exact same size as the half sheet pan. Now, what I don't want you to stress about is any of the unevenness. If you can see there, the rough edges, that's what you want in a galette. You do not want it perfectly like cleaned up, squared off, or rounded off, depending on what shape you're doing. Okay, so on the bottom of our pastry, I've just got some peach preserve here. You could use any jam that you wanted, or if you happen to have some pastry cream kicking around, as one does, you can put that on the bottom, and then you would have a cream-based galette. So I'm not doing a ton of jam here, just a little bit, a light smear over the top. This was probably maybe about 4 tablespoons or so. I will, of course, have the written recipe for you available at enidgrace.com, so you can follow along with exact measurements. All right, so I've got my peach jam now on the base. And then for the fruit. So I'm going to do color blocking on this because I just think it looks really pretty. But if you don't have the patience for it, you can just throw all of your fruit into the center, all rough and tumble, and then bring the sides up. So I'm gonna start with some of our peaches. Now, this is where my recommendation, again, it might depend on the size of your fruit. I'm actually going to leave them in full halves. If you wanted to, however, you could either have your halves or turn your halves into quarters, and then you could stack them up this way. But I'm gonna go with my full halves. So I'm going to start with a row of peaches here, and I'm leaving about kind of about 2-inch border because I'm leaving my fruit quite plump. I want to be able that all of my sides can come up and slightly over the fruit. So just use your own discretion based on what size of fruit you're using. Okay, so there's a row of peaches, and now I'm going to go in with some of these red plums. Oops. And just the same thing, I'm just going to do a tight little row directly beside my peaches, and then some of these beautiful black ones down the middle. And then I did have some of these Italian black plums, and I just had 2 of them because they're quite generous and plump. I just need 2 of them there. And now I'm going to do peaches. Actually, I'm going to do the red plum again. There's no real artistry to this and outside of just doing straight lines, so you don't have to do the exact same pattern. And then final row of these, and then one last row of peaches, and I just need to shift just a scotch to make sure that my pastry has enough on the side here. Perfect. And I have one little half left for me to enjoy. Okay, so I've got my rows of stone fruit now, which I hope you can see. And then to make the actual galette, I'm just going to bring my long side up first, like so, and just gently press it down. And then bring up first of my shorter sides, and again, just up and over the fruit, not completely covering the end rows of fruit, sort of halfway covering. And then just working my way around, just folding it up and just gently pressing it down into the fruit. And then my last edge here, just bring this up. And then you can just pinch off the corners, like so, just to ensure that they stay tightly closed. And if you notice any little like cracks or anything like that in the side of the dough, feel free to just kind of push them together. The more rustic looking, the better. That is the beauty of a galette. All right, and everything is cozy, tucked inside here. I have a little bit of egg wash, which is just egg yolks with a touch of cream. And I'm just gonna go all along the exterior of the pastry. And this will add a little bit of gorgeous golden brown color, but I more so think of it as a bit of a lacquer on the outside of your pastry. So in the event that you do have some small little cracks, it'll just help kind of keep them held together, without any of the juices from the fruit spilling out and causing a larger crack. And just make sure you get right down to the bottom with your egg wash. So, all right, and then you can use just some regular white sugar if you'd like. I have a little bit of turbinado or rough sugar, and this will add some nice crunch and a little bit of sparkle. And you can put it all along the pastry, and if you want to, a little bit on top of the fruit as well. And that is ready for the oven. So I'm going to put this in the oven. This is probably going to take about 28 to 30 minutes at that 375-degree oven. So I'm going to nick this in the oven, and then, as always, I take the opportunity when something's in the oven to read a little book, and I'll share that with you in a moment. All right, I'm going to do a quick little tidy up here, and then, like I said, I'll probably have about half an hour or so while that's baking to sit down and read a little book. And I grabbed this one off the shelf because I absolutely adore this author, and I really, really love this little book, particularly because of the illustrations on the inside. But you've probably heard me mention Elizabeth David before. I think she is just a wonderful food writer and cookbook author, and she has so many incredible books. She's an English woman, but she just, I think she's a bit of a master. And if you're looking for kind of some insight into what she was like before you go into purchasing any of her cookbooks, this is a good one to pick up. So this is A Book of Mediterranean Food by Elizabeth David. It's just a little paperback, and it's got stories, recipes, and more. But what I love most about it is the chapters are broken down, of course, by menus, I guess. And this one is eggs and luncheon dishes, which I just love. But I really, really love, and I'll try and get that as close as I can, the illustrations in these. I just find them so charming. But like I said, this is a good little read. I mean, something you could easily read in a day if you wanted to. But it does have great recipes in it. It's got stories, it's got quotes from other famous food people, and I just really love her. So if you've never heard of Elizabeth David and you're interested in her work, be sure to do a little bit of research on her cookbooks, of course, but this is a fun little read as a little bit of an introduction to Elizabeth David. All right, clean up, book, cup of tea, and I'll be back with our finished galette. All right, she is fresh out of the oven and exceedingly hot. So I'm just going to do a little lift here so you can see. Got a little bit of juice just off to the side here, which is totally fine. In fact, it's delicious. As it cools, it'll kind of adhere to the outside of the crust and it'll be sweet and juicy and just a little bit tart. So our pastry, nice and, I don't know if you can hear that, nice and crispy on the outside, but it's delicate and light. I lifted up the bottom just to take a little peek, and it's perfectly golden brown on the bottom. Again, this was about 28 to 30 minutes or so at that high temperature. And the fruit is not like collapsed and mushy. It still has some texture to it, but it just yields to my knife, particularly the larger pieces of peach and plum. The smaller plums, obviously just based on their size, get a little bit a little bit softer. Imperative to let this cool. Probably a good 10 minutes just to let the juices kind of reset back together and let that crust kind of cool down a bit and absorb those excess juices. So I'm going to let this cool, going to clean up a few more odds and sods around the culinary barn, and then I'll come back and cut a piece of this and give it a try. Hi everyone. Unfortunately for this last little segment, my lapel mic went out and unfortunately I didn't realize it at the time. So I'm just going to give you a quick little voiceover to finish off this recipe video. As you can see, I've let the galette cool for a good 10 to 20 minutes, and I'm making some suggestions here on how you might want to serve this. The simplest way is just a little bit of confectioner sugar or icing sugar, just lightly sprinkled on top. Ultimately, you could really gild the lily with this, and if you wanted to serve it for a very simple yet elegant dessert course, you could do a little bit of creme fraiche or perhaps some chantilly cream, or serve it warm with some vanilla bean ice cream just on top. I, of course, have to try everything, and just look at that gorgeous color. That's just a peach corner right there. And I'm just showing the bottom there and giving the knife a little slide on the bottom so you can hear the crispiness. Again, sorry, you can't hear that. And I'm just going to take a little bite here, and I'm sure by the look on my face, you'll be able to tell that I really enjoyed it. Yep, there's the little hip wiggle. Definitely love it. All right, so the entire written recipe will be available at enidgrace.com, and it's under the recipes tab, and you'll have all the measurements there as well as the full method, which you can use in conjunction with this video. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you're not currently subscribed, please do so, and if you like this video, I'd appreciate you letting me know. I hope you give this very simple galette a try with whatever fruit happens to be in season for you right now. And until we meet again, happy eating.